All right, perhaps we will go ahead and start. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming along today. My name, this is the, hello. Uh, yeah, make sure microphones are turned off and cameras are turned off. Steph, I think yours is on by chance. Thank you. All right. Well, um, good evening and welcome everybody to this first public life conversation for the Southampton Institute of Arts and Humanities for this academic year. We're very honored to be joined today by Dipesh Chakrabarty, who is currently the Lawrence A. Kimpton Distinguished Service Professor in History, South Asian Languages, and Civilizations at the University of Chicago. He is also a faculty fellow of the Chicago Center for Contemporary Theory, and by courtesy, a faculty member in the law school. He is a founding member of the editorial collective of Subaltern Studies, a consulting editor of Critical Inquiry, and a founding editor of Postcolonial Studies. He has also served on the editorial boards of the American Historical Review and the journal Public Culture. His most recent book is The Climate of History in the Planetary Age, which is something we will use as a bit of a catalyst and a springboard for the conversation today. My name is Ryan Bishop. I'm professor of global art and politics at the Winchester School of Art in the University of Southampton. And we're joined today by my friend and colleague, Priti Mishra, who is associate prof in the history department at the University of Southampton. So with that, thank you very much, Dipesh and Priti, for joining me today. I greatly appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Thanks, Ryan.
Great.
This is very exciting.
Thanks. Okay, well, we bounced some emails back and forth and had a very general topic to get things going, and it sort of builds on, but allows for a bit of critical distance and reflection from the book, The Climate of History and the Age, in the Planetary Age. So the topic is primarily about the status of the concept of planetarity and how it is being developed and used by different scholars in the present moment, how it sits in the public sphere, and the challenges to thinking along these lines, challenges that emerge from revanchist nationalism, continue through to climate denial with autocratic regimes, a new administration in the US who is wholly embracing fossil fuels and ceding green technologies to the PRC, international law and norms, and ways to facilitate its potential capacities, that is, the potential capacities within the concept of planetarity for resistance, change, and renewal. And so with that kind of large playground, and playgrounds figure in your introduction, don't they? I thought I'd just kind of roll things out and see if there are any elements of that strike your fancy, Dipesh.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I should actually start by, if you don't mind, and I do it with respect, is correcting on a small detail. My last book, Climate Change, is called One Planet, Many Worlds, The Climate Parallax, which came out in 23. And
I knew I missed out something. I'm sorry.
So anyway, it's because I do further the idea of planetarity a little bit.
Great.
The first book, yeah. But look, the idea of, I mean, as you know, I'm not the first person to have spoken of planetarity. Of course, Gayatri Spivak made some very tantalizing suggestions. Eugene Thacker in New York had interesting thoughts about how one might think about planetarity. So I don't by any means claim that I'm the originator of the term. And when I started to work on climate change, I really, I mean, my initial proposition was that if human beings have an impact with their technology, numbers, consumption levels, if they have an impact on biodiversity, on species extinction, And the geologist friend wrote that the impact is like that of the asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs.
Yes.
Then somewhere with our in our collective existence, with all those things about technology and consumption, we are like a huge big thing that's hit the planet. And we are like, and I was struck by this collapse of the distinction between natural history and human history when I started working on this. And and Catherine Malabou, the French philosopher,
Yes.
came along as I was doing, and she wrote a very interesting comment on my work, where she pointed out, and later in conversation too, she pointed this out. She said, "You realize that we speak of globalization and global warming, but the word globe means different things
Yes.
in the two expressions." And so it was Professor Malabou who got me thinking about the distinction between the two globes, right? And eventually I realized that the globe of globalization is what humans have made
Yes.
due to European expansion, imperialism, colonization, slavery, all the growing capitalism, all the growing inequalities on which, but also the technology that actually made it all possible for the Europeans to kind of make this sphere that we live on uh, kind of our spherical habitat, where we are now everywhere. We weren't everywhere, but we're now everywhere, thanks to the human making of the globe. So I realized that the globe of globalization is very much a human-centric story. And humans are its protagonists. It's our conflicts, our technology, our empires, the slavery we create, the colonizations that we undertake, the destruction of Aboriginal societies, and the taking over of their land. It's that story. And eventually, it's a story of actually our inventing life-saving public health policies, the germ theory of disease, eventually the invention of antibiotics in the 1920s, which actually saves lives. And if you look at human longevity, this technological globe, the technosphere, has also allowed us to save more lives, have more human beings around, and have them, each one of them, live for longer on the whole. So even the longevity of the poor has actually increased. That's the story of globalization.
Right.
That's the story of the global middle classes beyond OECD countries, the new middle classes in Asia,
Yes.
Africa, Latin America, who are now the main bulk of consumers in China, of course,
Yes.
in the world. That's globalization. And that, whereas when we talk about global warming, we're talking about things like sea level rise, the capacity of the oceans to contain heat, the greenhouse gases capability to retain heat and raise the temperature. So we are speaking of not the technological globe that we made, that humans made. We are actually speaking of another infrastructure that has naturally evolved, which includes biodiversity, which has actually sustained life for billions of years, and complex multicellular life for at least 500 million years,
Mm-hmm.
right? and which speaks to the processes, the geological and biological processes that come together to make this planet habitable for life in general. Whereas when we speak of green capitalism, or we speak of decarbonizing, we are often talking about making human societies sustainable,
Yes.
even
Yes.
capital sustainable,
Yeah.
right? But the condition for sustainability is that we don't destroy habitability.
Yes.
If there's no habitability, if the planet turns out to be inhospitable to life, then there can't be any sustaining of human societies.
No, I mean, the idea of saving the planet is ridiculous. The planet will continue.
Yeah.
It's whether or not humans
You
can
don't doubt us.
exist
It will.
within it.
It will.
And
But we now have the potential to cause another great extinction.
we do, and that's
Life might survive it, but usually the species that The dominant species usually doesn't survive a great extinction, or it doesn't remain dominant after great extinction, right? So basically, what Malibu helped me realize is that I was dealing with two entities at once, which at one level initially looked to me that they were very different kind of scalar entities. Like you might speak of, billions of years of life.
Right.
And Homo sapiens about 300,000 years old. You might speak of human events, even very significant human events like the French Revolution may look like the blink of an eye on a geological timescale. But at the same time, as I worked with the idea of habitability and planetary more, I realized the planet is at one level it's singular, like as the Earth system, an Earth system. Earth system, they don't call it Earth systems, they actually call it Earth system that supports life.
Earth system sciences, yeah.
Right. At another level, it can be very small, it can be profoundly personal as your weight, which is how you're dealing with the gravitation of the planet. Right? People speak as though they were sovereigns of their weight. I want to lose weight. I've gained too much weight. But that I is not as operative as they think it is, because weight is your experience of gravitation. The fact that we have these opposable digits, fingers, that's evolution. The problem. So you realize that this deep history and your biography, your biographical life, they are kind of together. So the planet at one level of abstraction is this single entity, Earth system. But the way that planetarity shows up differs from one place to another, right? In like the Himalayas, you might be losing glaciers. Along the coast of Kerala, the sea level rise and the salinity of fresh water might be a more important problem.
Yes.
So the planet in that sense is both singular and plural.
Yes. And local. And that local scales all the way up.
Exactly.
To
so
the biosphere.
It's scalable. Yeah. It's scalable.
Yeah.
So you can talk about geoengineering the climate of the whole planet.
Right.
You can talk about the problems of a local community, like fishing women in the Bengal Delta, who are fishing small fish in waters that used to be fresh, becoming salty, and the salt is giving them all kinds of infections in their reproductive organs, which some rogue doctors taking advantage of their lack of education, where they're doing hysterectomy on these women, charging them money. So suddenly you may have a problem as gendered and political as women having rights to them, right? Because of the rise of the sea level and the seawater flowing inland to contaminate fresh water. In Kerala, women were telling me that they have to go longer to get fresh water to cook with. The coastal women, right? So the planet shows up every moment of our lives in multiple ways. So it's one thing to appreciate what Earth system scientists are saying about how it kind of creates a system, combining all these processes, their feedback loops, a kind of a system that lurches from one state to another, but still keeps life going. And then this infinite variability of what the planet is for humans as you go from one place to another.
So in that situation, rethinking the global caused you to kind of reposition, understanding these two related but very different sorts of ways of thinking about the globe, and the globe operates in a number of different registers, as you've just articulated. The planetary enters in a particular way, and then begins to, and as you say, it didn't originate with you, but it had resonance with you and resonance from you. And I do think of the globe, my way of thinking about the global primarily is post-World War II and the technosphere and the capital that accrued around that, and weapon systems and military technology, etc. But also thinking about it then as the planet as just a concept to think with that introduces that other globe, the Earth System Science Globe, that is both singular and plural.
Yeah, and it has to, I mean, you put your finger on something very important. We are still living in a world that has the long shadow of the Cold War.
Absolutely.
Over our lives. So
Yep.
the science of climate change comes out of the Cold War.
Yep.
And the science comes out of systems thinking that was going on both in the Soviet Union and in the US, and close to where you are. And now in Vienna, they used to have this International Institute for Systems Analysis.
Yes.
And even if you go back to the
1930s in biology with von Bettelmann,
it begins to happen.
Yes.
And cybernetics is understanding.
Yes, absolutely.
And then even if you go back to the 1972 Club of Rome report, limits to growth, which is the first time they're saying you can't have unlimited growth.
Yeah, the Rome.
It comes a lot out of systems thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
So what happens? I often say that, look, if you forget the industrial part of human history, think of indigenous people, think of peasant societies.
Yes.
They were always aware of the planet because
they took
the season seriously.
Mm-hmm.
The weather, whether it rained too much or the sun shined for too long, shone too long, these were life and death questions.
Absolutely.
Right. And even when I think back to, I mean, Preeti would appreciate this. Even when I look at wars before the British came to India, the wars were seasonal. There are times when you couldn't ford a river.
Yeah.
You had to stop. Even the early East India Company records are always talking about their powder getting wet.
Yes.
And the first roads that the British built, and they're very proud of, they call them all-weather roads. So you actually see, as you come into the industrial civilization, you actually see human beings inventing technology for defeating the seasons and the weathers, for not just marginalizing, but aestheticizing them. Isn't it a beautiful day?
Yes.
I'm sure there's a kind of parallel history in painting.
There is, and there's a parallel history in painting and music, and also if you think about something like wind as an agent and an effect of climate change, but it was also aestheticized as and always all the way through.
No, that's it's so interesting to say that. So I now think of the history of this aestheticizing, the history of the development of our capability to aestheticize nature.
Yes.
As part of forgetting nature.
Yes, it's a way to store it and
to control it.
You think you can control it. It is not a life and death question. And over time, as technology develops, you kind of, nobody says it. I mean, people used to talk about conquering nature. That was a theme. But even if they don't say it, it's like it's a sideshow going on. While the main business is making money, class struggle, whatever. So either on the left or on the right, there is a kind of developing anthropocentrism. Kind of an intense interest in what humans are able to do to each other, partly because humans actually are able to live longer. Yes. So there's more at stake. Montaigne, the great French essayist.
Yes.
He has an essay called Philosophizing is Learning to Die.
Right.
And I mean, that idea that, I mean, it's a Stoic idea that
it is. It's the memento mori.
Teach you to die, how to accept death. And in fact, my friend Scott Ryan, who actually served in the American military in the first Iraq War, eventually came back and did a PhD in humanities, wrote a beautiful book called Learning to Die in the Anthropocene. He's accepting the death of capitalism, But you see, Montaigne in the essay, so when he writes it, he's 39. And he says, I'd love to have another 39 years. But most of my friends are gone already, right? And the entire essay is going through Cicero and others, thinking about what death is and
Yeah.
accepting death.
Yeah.
So you see what happens in cultures where death is more frequent and life seems more ephemeral.
Yeah.
In spite of all the fighting that people do, people get very philosophical about life very easily.
Yeah.
I mean, you grow up in India going to the cremation ground.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And we in Bengali, maybe in Odia you have this.
It's on the beach.
Called philosophers of the burning ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where people are always philosophizing, what is the point of living? This is what it comes down to eventually, you know. But as death becomes distant and almost loses social meaning, cultural meaning,
Yeah.
we're able to extend life. We begin to take more of an interest in what human life is. And I see the rise of the demand for justice, socialism, all of those things also as part of a more intensified interest in what human life is. Same on the part of the capitalists, except that they want the joy for themselves.
Yes.
And we want the joy to be more distributed.
But that relationship of temporality, sorry, Priti, I'll shut up.
It's fine.
I'll shut up in a minute. That difference of temporalities between the human lifespan changing over time, but also that relationship of human temporality to planetary temporality, various life systems within the planet and its temporalities, is one of those things that I think is a real limit to the imagination of what humans are capable of considering, because there's a way in which the world does not exist without them in it.
Well, you see what happens, you're totally right. And you see the limits even with the LA fires.
Yes.
Because see what's happened is that more and more human beings, so here's the human story as I see it.
Right.
Neoliberal capitalism. I see, if you look at just numerically, the amount of things that human beings would consider wealth, that's gone up. You know, if you add the global GDPs, it's gone up. The fact that there's a huge amount of concentration of wealth in the hands of the super rich people is also true. But the cake has also grown. So on the one hand, you have the Elon Musks and the Adanis and the Ambanis and others. And I mean, India has about 150,000 of them. Globally, there would be, you know, I don't know how, a substantial number of very super rich people. But even below them, there's a kind of a growing middle class of which we are all parts. And that has created new aspirations in China, India, and other places for the good life, good life, right? And some of us,
life is an interesting phrase, as you know.
It is.
If you think about it in terms of antiquity,
exactly.
It's just the opposite in antiquity.
But just the opposite. But I mean, Bill Gates' book, 2021 book called How to Avert a Climate Disaster, actually is premised on the assumption that we need techno fixes because everybody deserves the good life. With the justice argument. It actually goes very well with Amartya Sen and Mabul Haq and Martha Nussbaum's idea of capability. The Human Development Index that the UN started developing from 1990 is part of a kind of justice argument, which is saying this must be available to everybody. But on either hand, there's an acceptance that this is the way to be for human beings. But in that literature, even though it comes into 2010s, there's not yet, it's still climate neutral. See, I mean, that climate neutrality gets challenged because they become aware that climate change is happening. And Amartya Sen actually wrote an interesting article in the New Yorker, I think, around 2014, if I'm not mistaken, which I cite in the first book, where he says that, oh, yes, we have a fiduciary relationship, humans, to other species. We need more energy for ourselves, but we have a fiduciary relationship, so we need to protect them, etc., etc. And even that, there's a kind of acceptance of human supremacism.
Yes, absolutely.
That is up to us. And he actually quotes a Buddhist maxim to that effect, that just as parents have responsibilities, we're in loco parentis vis-a-vis other species. that's why there's no understanding of the habitability problem, the biodiversity problem, what actually keeps life going. We are not in charge of keeping life going.
No, it
Right?
wasn't designed for us.
Right, exactly. So that's where we are at. And so the problem I find is that for 150 years, we've become so accustomed. It's a good thing for us to living longer. And if any other species had been able to invent technology that allowed them to live longer, they would have done it. I think, as Venkat Ramakrishnan goes on saying, that it's in the nature of a biological body to rest want to rest few more moments.
Yeah.
Existence. That's what we are. And we are the only species that made it possible. But we have made it possible with the help of fossil fuels, which are still integral to the making of steel, concrete, plastics, all these kind of things. And therefore we've extended our life. We are complete. I mean, you and all of us will agree on that, on the justice question, that this should be available to everybody, right? But the square peg in the round hole is, how do we go on having the good life and not destroying the habitability condition? Because as I said, if the planet doesn't remain habitable, we are not sustainable.
Yeah.
So would you say that the argument, the call to arms, so to speak, of this planetary humanities, as you call it, is to imagine a world without us, that it's about thinking about human death as much as...
Well, I mean, okay, so that, if you were a polar bear,
Yeah.
or if you could imagine into the thought world of a polar bear, you might find that you were wishing that.
Yeah.
As a human being, I find it very difficult to wish that, because the brunt of that wish will have to be borne by the poor people and the more vulnerable people.
Yeah.
So I think a genocidal thought is no solution. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, the world might be better off without us.
Yes.
Other species might be better off. But so I actually think the challenge then is, what Hans Jonas, with regard to technology, once called the imperative of responsibility. In other words, you can't be a technological civilization without being responsible about that technology. Right at the moment, what we have is completely unregulated technology. Technology made only for profit. Only for humans, but only for profit. It's only pushed along by the profit motive. And clearly we need, I mean, if we were to see, if we don't want the scramble for the good, or the search for the good life, to become a scramble. If it became a scramble, it would lead to conflict, wars, people defending it. It'll divide the human world very badly. If it becomes clear that we can't sustain this many people, so therefore, who will live? Right at the moment, what I see, the reason why I mentioned the LA fires, what I see is that the default position is, with regard to climate change and climate disasters, that if it hasn't happened to me yet, I'm not going to think about it.
It's not real.
It's not real, right? And even when it happens to you, if you listen, I've listened to talks in Australia about huge fires. And of course, it's Australian fires that got me thinking about the problem.
Yes.
And the LA fires, is that the tendency is still to think of this as episodic.
Yes.
It's happened to somebody, it hasn't happened to me yet.
Yeah.
Oh, it's happened to me, but we'll all fight this and we'll rebuild our lives. Now, there are clearly things about where you shouldn't build.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are clearly things about recognizing that the world is getting drier.
Yeah.
And dry winds will produce,
More
tinder.
fires.
Exactly. So pushing insurance company not to insure houses in risky areas. There are a lot of policy issues that you can take up. But it also means, even in the end, if you're going to have both habitability and the good life and have human justice, intrahuman justice, then you have to rethink how much space one can have, what kind of travel one can do. Questions like, should air travel be rationed? right? But that would require a different industry. And the problem is we're still in this moment, like in a country like America, if you mention any of those things, I'm sure somebody will say socialism.
Yes.
Yes, that it is a big problem. But if you think about, the fossil fuel depletion and the ways in which we understand it and the ways in which we understand its impact on climate, the very thing that's allowing us to have this conversation right now it is that kind of infrastructure, right? And allows us to use these technologies. And that was, the insight by Paul Edwards with global computation as being the thing that first detected and then verified climate crises, right? So AI, which uses an inordinate amount of natural resources, and especially fresh water, I think a lot of there's this weird balance there, because people are hoping that it will help to solve the problem that it in turn exacerbates. So there's these complexities are at so many different levels, but as you say, it's almost always beyond the sense of what registers in the quotidian consciousness of people.
No, that's why I think, Bill Gates' book, and I'm talking about it because it's a very smart book. He's a knowledgeable philanthropist, intelligent,
Yeah.
smart one. And the argument in his book, so first of all, he begins by saying, I can't solve the political problem of climate change. It's beyond me, but I'll give you a techno fix. He says, I'm a white man, rich man with many opinions, and I'm a techno fixer, so I'll give you a techno fix. So the techno fix is like battery technology, carbon sequestration, and geoengineering. But in all this, he assumes, I mean, he's saying we should get down to zero emissions 2050 or whatever, on which we're already late and
Yes.
slow. But he assumes that somehow the planet will kind of wait in the wings while we are sorting this out.
Yeah, it's not.
And whereas you're actually facing a system that's complex, non-linear.
Yes.
It's not a linear system, so it's not kind of coming at a fixed speed or a fixed acceleration. It
It's surprising.
So even when I read somebody like him, and I read him because his assumptions inform a lot of US university initiatives on climate. They come from the same kind of school of thought. So what I see is this human inability. So I'm not blaming him, but this inability to do these very contradictory things together. I completely agree that it's very hard to give on the pleasures of the good life that we're discovering. It's therefore very hard to give out the justice argument that it should be everybody's. But at the same time, think about how to delimit the human realm.
Yeah.
Withdraw.
Modify the good life. Yeah.
Modify it, withdraw it, maybe some kind of degrowth.
Yeah.
But people are not working on those transitions. The main strategy is to continue this life, bring other people into it. So make more middle classes, pull people out of poverty using capitalism. But assuming that somehow the planet will come along to the party at the right time, and as a polite planet.
With something nice to say. Just to remind everybody who's in the conversation, we will be speaking to Dipesh for about another 10, 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions. So please place your questions in the chat, and we'll take them up. So, Priti, do you want to leap in?
Yeah, I have so many questions, but the couple of things that kind of arose when you were talking about death is that it immediately puts us in the mind of religion. And I was wondering how religion serves in this kind of almost shifting of attention that you're calling for, because it seems as though if history was the history of man, his story, now it's the planet's story. It's no longer the context. It's actually acting upon human life. Where would you place religion in this narrative? And
well, I mean, religion. See, I mean, my friend François Hartog's written a lot about it. Religion is already there in whenever we say this is apocalyptic.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's a religious word, right? Coming from certain traditions.
Yeah.
Religious is there when friends in Bangladesh would say Allah Gojab, the curse of Allah,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're getting punished. A certain kind of spirituality is already there when people talk about using traditional idioms, nature's revenge.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
I still remember a Doctor Who film, old enough to remember Doctor Who films. The Day of the Triffids, I think it was called, when plants were going to invade human households and take them over, right? But there's also even in Prime Minister Modi's writings on climate change. He actually authored a book on climate change when he was the chief minister in Gujarat. I mean, whether he wrote it or a team wrote, whatever, but there's
Somebody
a
wrote it.
reference to the Vedas
Mm.
and things. So I think religion is there because religion is coeval with humanity,
Mm.
and it's, whether you acknowledge it or not, it's some spiritual form. I think that's why when you read either Cicero or Cicero through Montaigne, you will find that there's a strong spiritual sense of life that informs that idea that philosophizing is to learn to die.
Yeah.
Right. So, but at the same, so what's happened civilizationally, I think, is that since we have defined the good life as this capable life, made life where you are made capable by technology, including medical technology, and you should. Martha Nussbaum's the first point in her charter for capability, international charter, is called life.
Mm.
She says everybody deserves the full term
Yeah.
of human life as made available by technology,
Mm.
and deserves to live so long as life is not decrepit and beyond repair.
Yeah.
Suddenly death gets defined as that time when your life ends.
Technology fails. Yeah.
Exactly. And so dying is no longer a form of life.
Yeah.
Form of living, right?
Mm.
And I think these conceptions leave us civilizationally poorer than pre-modern civilizations where humans had to deal with death all the time.
Yeah.
And therefore, like in Homer, for instance, the
Yeah.
idea of a glorious death.
Mm.
So hero gets a glorious death because glory is actually how other people remember you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right? So this whole question of how people will remember you was very important because death came anytime. My colleague Jonathan Lair has written a book about some tribal people in the Illinois area where the highest form of life was to die fighting for your tribe in your 20s. And if you lived beyond that, you lived into your 50s and 60s, you hadn't had a good life. So I think there are, and last I come to Gandhi. So there's a story that you're Ajay student, so you'll appreciate this story even more. So there was in Gandhi's ashram once, I think in Sabarmati, there was a smallpox infection going around. And Gandhi was anti-vaxxer, as you know. So he wouldn't allow it for any vaccinations. And then a little child of 3 died. And people came to him and said, now you must allow vaccination. Children are dying. And he thought for a while and said, I think my maker is testing my resolve. You can all leave me and go. But won't allow vaccination. But you see, Gandhi had this position that seems weird today, where he was really saying, I will look after the dying, but I won't value human life.
Yeah.
Right? In a way, it's kind of Mother Teresa's position. So it's a very spiritual position where you say, but that is the opposite value of the capable approach values.
Yeah.
See, a Martha Nussbaum would actually say, that's terrible. That's condemning people to death. And here's a civilization that can give you good health. So we're stuck in this point that we created the modern concept of the good life.
Yeah.
Through a phase of our civilization when we marginalized the planet, marginalized the seasons, the weather, and all the other things of what I call intimations. And the unfortunate part is that we therefore defined life as kind of opposed to death. So it's sort of civilized, and that's where I think there's need for art and religion and all of those other things to bring meaning, human meaning. Neoliberalism has no sense of tragedy, no sense of irony, right?
Yeah.
But these are things that the humanities can provide, art can provide, philosophy can provide, religion can provide. How to deal with these things. Because, if you look at small lives, whether they're rich people's lives in LA fires or in Australian fires, or poor people's lives, the coastal people, I mean, there are small human tragedies, small and big human tragedies happening. I mean, the deaths in LA, but there was a death that happened to a man who was wheelchair bound and his spastic child.
Yeah.
They couldn't move. Right. So I think just to finish off, there's a huge role where we have to kind of redeem this civilization by using all those resources available to us.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that there are multiple crises plaguing all of existence at the current moment cannot be laid at the feet of arts and humanities. But we might be able to offer some solutions and maybe some moments of respite, some moments of therapy, some moments of pause.
Meaningfulness, and also to make us realize that to give up on consumerism, over consumerism, waste of resources, it's not a bad thing.
No, it's not.
It's meaningful to be less rich. It's meaningful not to travel so much. It's meaningful not to be so consumed by your own self.
Return to Gandhi in some ways.
Gandhi or other resources. That's what I mean. You don't have to be as cruel as Gandhi.
No, not at all. I know we are running out of time, so I'm just making sure we have a bit more time. I think because we are running out of time, I wanted to kind of bring you to your earlier work, because that is very, very, at least in my career, it's been very influential. Your work on provincializing Europe, especially your idea of, and in some ways the Planetary feels like it's straight out of a certain kind of Dipesh Chakrabarty playbook of thinking.
Of history one, history two.
Yeah, of history. Oh, see, that's exactly what I was going to say. Of history one and history two. And I was just wondering, given the fact that it does feel connected, in some ways, one could read the Planetary as an argument for history two, that's something that's outside of the history of capital, but outside of other sorts of histories as well. If you went back in time, how would you write this book differently? How would you write Provincializing Europe differently, given your journey now? I mean,
I do say this in the book. I mean, postcolonialism as a field was environmentally blind, as I said, until Rob Nixon's book.
Yeah.
And Rob Nixon's book was, I think, 2011 or something.
Yeah.
But Homi and Gayatri were doing their stuff mainly in the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah.
Edward Said, of course, 1978.
Yes.
So it's the same period when the IPCC had been set up. So we have the ozone layer crisis in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
Then the IPCC set up in 1988. Carbon dioxide is growing through post-colonial years.
Well, you have Rachel Carson in
Rachel Carson,
her
62, and we were not reading her.
Yeah, I mean, so you had that whole wave in the latter part of the 50s through the 60s.
So we are actually going along with Robert Solow and Amartya Sen, Development as Freedom.
Yes.
Not reading Rachel Carson, not reading Limits to Growth, because Limits was busted by the Green Revolution.
Yeah.
We can feed more people.
Yes. Yeah.
And fossil fuel is critical to the production of artificial fertilizers. So we were going along with the growth story, except we were the Justice Party in the growth story. Right?
Yeah.
And so were Sen and Nussbaum. in their own ways.
Yeah.
You know, so I think I would make the book more sensitive to this other
Yeah.
stuff, and then see what would have been the interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably mainly what
Yeah.
I would do. My book was as environmentally blind as other book. But the book lives on. I mean, next year it will be its 25th year, and some people tell me they want to organize panels and stuff.
Yeah. No,
25
I can see why.
year.
Yeah.
And because most people are still in the growth with justice, growth with inclusion story.
Yes. Yeah.
Most people think that has to be the primary story for human beings.
Yeah.
You know, and most of my friends in India that I work with, speak to, most of them, they know about climate change, but they don't really think about it.
They don't really. Yeah.
No, I mean, environmentalists do, but
Yeah.
my ex-subaltern studies friends and others,
No.
they think about the nation and communalism and Hindu-Muslim or caste question,
Yeah.
um, or they want to blame a particular human
Person.
part of society too. Yeah.
It's a, so is there a way, because there's some anxiety in the kind of reception of your work, that this sort of what do we do with the decolonial approach? And does the planetary, can it sit together with the decolonial approach?
And I think if you think of degrowth and modifying the good life, I think the decolonial approach has things to offer, not as a complete alternative.
Yeah.
I mean, see, there's nothing in indigenous heritage that would extend life.
No.
There's nothing in indigenous or peasant heritage that would feed 10 billion people.
No.
Right? But on the other hand, there's a lot of, I mean, I have a friend in Texas who is actually working with, he's an engineer in the engineering faculty, but he works with some Native Americans, blending technologies for filtering of water in places that were totally destroyed by American mining of uranium, nuclear project. And he discovered that they had a sort of technology which filters water much better, uranium pollution.
Yeah.
Right? But there was a traditional technology for glazing pottery, which is actually using a tree sap. Which modern technologists wouldn't have known about it. We only know about it from indigenous knowledge. But what he's showing through his work is that there's no huge antagonism between the two.
Yeah.
He's actually learning from that and putting that technology to water filtration use. So I think there's a lot to learn from people who have had societies that have been much more stable for much longer, not consumerist societies.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in India, we went from having recyclable to, by choice, having disposable things because we thought this was the good life. You throw, the throwaway pen is the fountain pen which you had to put ink in every time, right? So we need to reverse some of those choices.
Yeah.
But it also means redeploying people. You have to think about unemployment. You have to think about who pays the price of the transition, all those things. And we are so far from actually doing that.
Yeah. It's not a question that rises. Since we're waiting for some questions, I had another question, which is sort of a departure. But
if I could jump in for just Priti, just for a second here. If people wish to put their questions in the chat, please do so. If you wish to ask directly on
just raise your hand.
Just raise the hand and we can call on you. Because as infinitely enamored with the sound of our own voices as well, at least as I am, then we're more enamored by yours. So please do chime in.
Excellent. Just for a bit, if we took the kind of critique that you kind of in passing mentioned, in the US, what you're arguing for would be just called socialism, let's say. If we took that seriously, just as a way to kind of understand the stakes of what you were actually asking for. Because when I was in the beginning, when I was trying to think about what I wanted to ask you, I had the same kind of knee-jerk response. What is going to happen to the decolonial, right? It's very threatening. And one of the things that felt that could happen is that the idea of thinking something universal, something large that is beyond a person, has kind of conceptual foundations that are already available to us, but from very kind of European-centered ways. So, universalism, etc., but particularly within the socialist canon, right? So, if we took that seriously, that critique, that isn't this just socialism? Isn't this basically asking us to do what the socialists would do, but also think about this kind of activism as, again, a collective of people beyond cultures? What would you say to that?
So this is what I would say to this argument. One problem that, as a student of history, I noticed about the assumptions of socialist argument, or even assumptions of lefty rational choice theorists, like Amartya Sen sometimes, is that as a student of history, I don't find many instances of humans coming together on a very large scale, making a rational decision, and then sticking to it.
Yes.
Right? What I find
yes.
What I find is that it's much easier for humans to produce rational argument and then game it for the benefit of some people.
Yeah.
Because that's what humans are. We are competitive from the bully in the schoolyard.
Yeah.
We are competitive animals, and even societies which produce more egalitarianism sometimes have to practice a lot of jealousy. To actually, jealousy becomes a way of controlling ambitions.
Yeah.
The tall poppy syndrome that people used to talk about in Australia. So the problem I find with any rational solution on a global scale, is that it would be, you made it would sound rational, then it would be gamed by powerful people.
Yeah.
So if you ask me, the despondent side of me says that the global game is lost. Solving climate change at this global level. Trump has already walked out of the Paris Agreement.
Again.
You look at, one of the things I say in my second book is that there is no human one we, to respond to this crisis of a unitary planet. Human politics is grounded in difference.
Yes.
Yeah, democracy is grounded in difference, politics is different. But as I said, because the planet is also scalar and turns up in our lives in other ways, in local communities, there's lots we can do. Whether we can synchronize all these actions across all the differences and make it into a global solution, which is what Bill Gates think we can do by techno-fixing. But he has the problem. He says, we need to do this sequester. But who is the we? Just oil companies? And governments will have to make policies.
Yeah.
And if the governments are considered as they are, then you'll have IPC, you will have IPCC, you'll have the COP processes, you'll have negotiations, bargaining, and those are done to defend national interests.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then you have to, in that global model of climate politics, you have to somehow assume that the planet will take some time out, go on a holiday, and then come back to join.
Come back and fight you. Yeah.
So I actually think that at a global level, what the scientists have defined is a problem that evolution did not make us capable of actually addressing. It requires us to come together, create this global we, with no suspicions of that we being the ruse of some power. Yeah. So if you could create a global we of which we are not suspicious in a Foucauldian way, it would work. But I think that's very difficult. But on the other hand, there are lots of local small we's that can work even across collectivities. There can be local solidarities or sometimes international solidarities, sometimes regional solidarities. The Himalayan glaciers are a regional problem. For a number of countries that contains 50% of the world's population.
That's true.
So there are many other scales on which I think the planet is addressable. And I personally put my hopes in that basket rather than the global basket.
Thinking scalar and incrementally
Yeah.
is probably about the best that we can hope for.
Right.
And it comes and goes in waves, as we were talking about. There were issues of this sort that were considered in the latter part of the 19th century, into the early part of the 20th century, and then around mid-century again. And it kind of waxes and wanes. But the biggest problem, as you say, is the planet does not go on pause.
Right.
And the planet is still taking it. And we are still looking too much at nature as standing reserve, as something that is there. It is as free as the air, and the air is not
The
free.
sad thing is, as somebody says, maybe we'll become a global we only when we think it's everybody's problem. It's not episodic.
Too late by then.
It could be too late by then as a global to address.
It's a global
So,
problem.
We have a question in the chat.
Yeah, it's more of a comment, but yeah.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, they are interested. If you could speak to this a bit more. Nadia Zaguri. Hi, Nadia. And you've written that you're very thankful for the profound conversation. I'm particularly interested in what you mentioned earlier, summarizing that the philosophy of death has made us think more politically. What could you elaborate on?
Yeah, I was saying, Nadia, that that the certain view of good life that the human development approach and the capability approach celebrates is one that almost makes death a meaningless, socially meaningless, culturally meaningless biological process, whereby humans go and isolate themselves in
Yeah.
some death sanctuary that you might call old people's home or whatever. And it's really dying like animals do. Animals leave their herd animals leave their groups and die in isolation, and it sort of reproduces that. Whereas death, we were distinct in that death was always a very social process.
Yeah.
Right. And we are facing more disasters. We are, because of the very technology that has increased longevity. It's very interesting. It first increased longevity by preventing infant mortality.
Yeah.
And the thing, if you can save an infant's life, then it's easy to add 30 years to a human being's life. If you can save infants. But if you're trying to save the life of an 80-year-old, it's much more expensive to add 2 more years, 5 more years. So that's why extending the age of old people gets more and more difficult. And I heard Venkat Ramakrishnan actually make this joke. I mean, he said that there is this joke. It's not originally his, but he says, who is the person who wants to be 100? And the answer is somebody who's already 99.
Yeah.
So, because as you, I mean, you begin to add old age diseases.
Yes.
For human beings, like Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, all of those things, type 2 diabetes. Whereas in Montaigne's time, dying in old age was a
privilege as such.
an achievement. Very few people did it. So in some ways, we have created a society in which we are alienated from the idea of death.
Yeah.
But if we think of, I'm recycling, Ryan's argument, that if you think of the possibility of capitalism dying, philosophically, if you think this is not the best system suited for us to be both have a good life and address habitability, that something needs to change. At least there's a collective conversation about philosophizing about the death of capitalism.
Yeah.
It's needed. And the hope that we don't need capitalism, this consumerist, wasteful kind, and this expansionist human realm, for humans to have a modicum of the good life.
Yeah.
At least if we make that question philosophically, then I think we can begin to make it politically.
On that lovely note, I think we'll have to draw a line under it because we're out of time. The hour went by far too quickly. Dipesh, thank you very much for joining us today. And I really appreciate your time, your thoughts, and your writing over the years. It means a lot.
Thank you very much.
This has been an absolute privilege. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody, for coming along. And sorry, Stephen, you weighed in just as we were wrapping up.
I know,
maybe,
they're two very good questions.
Yeah, they are.
Yes, I wish we had time to actually go into that. These are very interesting questions coming up. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks again, Dipesh. I'll drop you a note afterwards, and just to do a follow up. But really appreciate it. Take good care.
Have a good day. Whatever is left for you.